Welcome to the IAB UK Podcast.
Hello, James here, and welcome to the IAB UK Podcast. It's another Fleet of Foot episode this week where we've gone off-piste from the planned schedule to bring you the views and opinions from two of the seminal and best-known authorities on the future of work and work culture. I'm, of course, talking about Christine Armstrong and Bruce Daisley, both writers and keynote speakers in their own right, but each with a laser focus on how we make the workplace better. And what else could we have been talking about other than this inevitable creeping feeling of being told we need to spend more time in the office? With the number of return to office mandates increasing, think Amazon and more recently WPP, and work from home and hybrid work, the theme of BBC's Panorama programme this week, who better to get into all the detail, the data behind it, and ultimately the winners and losers than Christine and Bruce. We start on productivity, and with Christine's latest assertion that productivity nonsense is everywhere. And I should say that the he she refers to at the start is Mark Reed, WPP's CEO.
I think it's really interesting that they all go to productivity, but in these very generalised terms. They never present any data saying, look, we've done an experiment, we've compared it across these agencies, we've rolled it out because this is what we're seeing. So what we see in his memo is talk about culture and creativity. We don't see any evidence for that. And as you know, and Bruce and I have discussed endlessly, the evidence on productivity and location is poor. Actually, what we generally see is that hybrid seems to give perfectly good productivity and uplift in some cases. Fully remote does have some downsides, but there is no evidence that I've seen, Bruce jump in, that their return to office increases productivity or indeed the performance of the company, which makes it really interesting that he's gone so hard on it.
What do you think, Bruce?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. All the evidence we've got is that broadly hybrid work is about the same productivity, but it makes employees so much happier that net, it's just a good thing to do. And I think I've spoken to a number of people, not necessarily just to make it about WPP, but I've spoken to a number of people who've worked in organisations that have tried to do a return to office mandate in the last few weeks. And senior leaders there say, look, it's a challenge because it's to some extent trying to mandate that we return to 2019. And wouldn't we all love to be able to wind the clock back and go to anywhere we wanted? But let me tell you, in 2019, bosses were moaning about everyone sitting at their desks wearing headphones. And I don't think there's a golden age of the past that we could ever return to, because it wouldn't be as we remembered it. The truth is that broadly, people are happier when they're able to have a bit more flexibility, when they're able to get their life into a degree of balance. On average, if you work in media, then you probably live in a big city of some sort. And it means that you're saving about 90 minutes a day by not going into the office. So it's just a big uplift to your own personal life. And probably you'll find yourself having a slightly better equilibrium. You'll feel less stressed about it.
Can I jump in there, James? I think that golden age is really interesting because you're actually reflecting the language of Trump there, Bruce, which is a bit of a surprise to all of us. But, let's go with it, because I was really thinking about Mark Reed's motivation, and he obviously wants the best for WPP. So he's done this for really rational, sensible reasons. And there's a really interesting piece in the FT today about him saying that he's considering floating in New York. And what I'm thinking is I'm wondering whether he's watching Trump. I'm hearing this from quite a lot of leaders, is that they're watching Trump with great interest this time around. And they may be wary of him sort of personally, but they're expecting a big boom. They're very interested in the AI. We know WPP is really interested in AI. And I wonder whether this is a move. And he kind of says, WPP needs to focus on the US and the UK should focus on the US. Whether actually that this is a move to align with what is expected to be a huge boom in the US around AI and an association with those tech guys that we saw in the background at the inauguration. I think some leaders are looking and thinking, let's not dismiss that just because we really feel a bit squeamish about some of it in the UK.
Yeah, and in amongst the many executive orders that he signed on Monday, there was one that was mandating that federal workers return to their offices full time. So he seems all in on this. To call out someone else, I don't know if you saw the BBC Panorama this week. Should we still be working from home? The ASDA CEO, Lord Rose, was sort of criticising the culture. He blamed that sort of young people don't like doing proper work, and they're sort of the reason that we're all declining. It's everywhere you look at the moment.
one of the challenges we've got is that broadly in the UK, salaries haven't increased really in the last 10 years. And so things that might have seemed perfectly reasonable and affordable 10 years ago, wages just haven't kept up with them. One thing that I always like reminding bosses is that the minimum wage in the UK is £21,500. So quite often when they tell me we've got good graduate salaries, I ask them to reflect on how good they are. So if you're asking people to come into the office every day, then £1,500 won't get you very far because you're spending several £1,000s every year travelling in. And it's one thing working for the minimum wage in your local McDonald's and walking to work. There's another thing working for just a little bit more than the minimum wage, but doing a job in inner city London or Manchester. So just understanding the lived realities. There's an organisation called Spare Room, and most people who are bosses won't have ever used Spare Room, but it's a place that you can try and find a house share. And Spare Room say there isn't a single postcode in London that's affordable on a starter salary. Wow. So it's important that when we're saying there was a golden age of going into the office, we also reflect of what purchasing power has changed and whether the jobs that we're offering actually buy the same quality of living. I think generally when we look at it, what most teams report is that if this is all about team cohesion, then making sure that the time you spend in the office is of value. Yeah. If people are travelling into the office, finding themselves on a hot desk, struggling to find a meeting room to do a call, it's no surprise that they don't necessarily report a magical connection that maybe bosses romanticise in the past. There was a post by Dave Trott, the sort of legend of ad creativity this week, and he said he was saying to his son, I loved my time in the office. 4 days a week in the office to me would be a gift. And his son said, Dad, these days it's hot desks. You're struggling to find anywhere to sit. And he said, stuff that then. I've got no interest in that whatsoever. And I think to some extent, people are conjuring with a version of what the office is that isn't necessarily a fair reflection of the trade-off it represents for today.
Yeah.
I saw a series of posts saying that people wanted the cubicle back, that open plan has become so noisy and overwhelming, they're so crowded, they can't even do calls properly. And some of the WPP guys were saying that clients were asking them to do calls from home because there's so much distraction. Yeah. So I think we have to think really deeply about that world. I think the other thing about young people, James, I was talking to Joe McKay-Sinclair, who I used to work with at WPP when I worked there. I worked at Omnicom and also got offered a job by Ajaz at AKQA. So I sort of know this world reasonably well. And what Joe said was he feels a bit sorry for the recruiters right now because WPP's flooded the market with CVs. And he runs the Romans, which is a super cool PR agency. It's won tons of awards, wins tons of awards. And, they want young, diverse, people with loads of backgrounds who can really connect with younger audiences. And how are they going to get that by going back to 2019? It feels really countercultural. And the leaders I'm speaking to in WPP are tearing their hair out over hiring.
Yeah, I'm sort of always reminded and quote it wherever I can, Bruce, of your kind of manning the looms quote. It's almost like proximity equals productivity. If I can't see the workers doing the work, how do I know the work's happening? Is there a bit of this going on as well?
Yeah. The idea that we can go to a 19th century mill owner and we'll be supervising work taking place. It's always been the case, hasn't it, that when someone is seen to look busy, then we perceive that they're doing the job. And it begs a really important question. How are we measuring productivity? Yeah. What does productivity look like? It's just this confusing term. One of the things that you found, I'm studying teams at the moment, one of the things that you find is that far bigger correlation with productivity is how big your employee turnover is. So if you're losing employees, if you've got a really high quit rate, so managers are having to do the job of their team, if everyone's covering up, then don't be surprised because productivity is going to take a hit. And so anything that improves employee retention, keeps people there, servicing their clients, has a disproportionate uplift on productivity. It's a mixed decision. Look, I get all of this. What we get in financial downturns is herding. Businesses look at what each other's doing and copy that. And so, look, what we're seeing is that some firms have had an RTO mandate. Their competitors and their rivals are looking at that, thinking we need to do that. We saw this with job cuts. A lot of firms saw that others in their sector were doing job cuts. hadn't even occurred to them, but they thought, well, we need to throw some red meat to our investors, so we're going to do some job cuts too. And I think this is the big alarming trend that might be looming on the horizon. Are we going to see herding? Are we going to see this corporate contagion of other things like DEI? Is everyone going to do a Zuckerberg, flip 180 and get rid of their DEI? Is everyone going to push into areas that maybe 12 months ago they wouldn't recognise? So I think that corporate herding comes with economic downturns. And I think probably the big thing is that to realise that differentiation in the long term is what sets businesses up, not copying other people. So deciding what your culture is, deciding what's special about it, deciding how that's going to be your superpower, that's way more, I think, sustainable and competitively advantageous.
Yeah.
Disagree. I don't think it is herding. I think it's polarisation. So I think we're seeing the market divide. And I think that Mark Reed is, from what I can read and understand, this is my pop psychology of Mark Reed, just by talking to people who work with him, is that he sort of looked at the American model and thought, I'm going to put my bets there. We're not doing great. Share price is not brilliant. Let's try a different direction. Most people in his sector are going the other way with a more hybrid approach, and time will tell which one is the right one. But I actually think he's doing it as a mark of differentiation and maybe trying to align more with the Wall Street banks. But to your earlier point, they're not offering the salary and the bonuses of those places. And culturally, what we see in creative industries is much flatter hierarchical structures, much more, creative collaboration, a different atmosphere than we'd expect from a bank. So I think how it plays out is fascinating.
If I push on creative a little bit, because it's the sort of, if you move on from creativity, the other reason that gets cited a lot is the physical space that we bought and made beautiful for you and is an area to come and be creative. It's an area where culture thrives, and that's another reason why we want you in. You've always talked about sort of the office smoothie maker and things like that, Bruce. You can make it as nice as you want, but it doesn't mean culture is going to sort of thrive there. You're going to be any more creative than you are sat on your sofa at home.
Yeah, the biggest frustration right now is for people travelling into the office and then sitting on Teams calls all day. So using an office and turn it into an experience is definitely valuable. You see some organisations talking about their office being a studio or, a place for teams to gather in person. I think the important thing to trade off in that regard is how many days you need. And generally what we see in the data is the bigger and more bureaucratic your organisation is, the more time, face-to-face time you want in the office. Right. It's almost like there's a gravitational pull for being big and corporate. You want more office time. When you ask teams what the right amount of time for them to be face-to-face is, generally the number they come to is lower. And I think the things that characterise really good teams are that they use face-to-face time differently. Sometimes the way I like to think about it is that there's some things that we need to sort of form a connection, and there's sometimes where, so it's like it's diversionary meetings and it's meetings where you coordinate. And so like if you've got a big ding-dong, a big argument, a big brainstorm, they are really effective doing them face-to-face. If you're just going through weekly updates, everyone looking at what their agenda is for the week, people going around the table, those things work quite well at home. And you've given someone a bit of freedom where they feel like, okay, I get my Monday done at home. Tuesdays are really energized, high productivity day in the office, and just you allow people some degree of trade-off. So I think the best teams seem to recognize that using face-to-face time as special is the thing that differentiates them.
I think on the creative side, James, what's interesting is that he said he wants to create a creative mile. So they've taken over the old FT headquarters. They've obviously got Rose Court, and then they've got Sea Containers House in a short run between them. And I think the idea behind this is to create this kind of creative hub of shared experience. I think the challenge, what I've heard from the WPP insiders, is there's not enough space to even do this if you wanted to. And a lot of the space isn't, I know Rose Court's pretty nice actually, the public bits that I've seen when I've done events there, but there isn't the kind of space that people actually want to work in. And advertising communications people are sensitive. When I worked at Omnicom BBDO, we moved our Paris office and we moved it out of a building that was designed to look like a ship at sail. It literally had portholes into an office building. The creative team didn't come to work for 3 weeks. They were so pissed off about that thing. So it's not easy. This is not an easy team to manage necessarily.
Yeah, and I wonder if just as you talk about the sort of the reasons for going in, Bruce, I wonder whether creativity's got those sort of two modes as well. There's sometimes where I want to be creative and I just want to riff off people and I want to get into arguments and robust things and I want all that alchemy. There's other times where actually I just need utter silence and solitude in order to write these things. So the idea that I'm going to go and do that in an open plan office might not work either. I would love to understand your take, Bruce, on what is this discomfort, what is this uncomfortableness from leaders about hybrid working? Why have we not wholesale sort of embraced it, given we've had it for so long? What's dragging us back into sort of getting people in to watch them doing what they're doing?
I think broadly we have accepted it. Managers spent ages telling us we need to embrace change. There's going to be constant change around here. Hybrid work came along and everyone said, I get that and I'm quite into it. And even middle managers say, okay, well, I've got my own responsibilities in my life. This gives me a good balance. Almost everyone I've spoken to, whether it's groups, whether it's the likes of Amazon that have gone back, they've said it was kind of working. The only people who I feel don't think it's working are the people who maybe have got a fond recollection of the past, or they like the idea of coming out of their corner office, being able to summon people over. But broadly, I would say that actually hybrid working has been one of the most popular changes to work in the last 2 generations. And so most people are in a place where they'd kind of got into the rhythm of it, they'd really enjoyed it. Okay, work looks a little bit different, feels a little bit different, but they were cool with it. It's why it's so surprising when you see these people demanding a return to the past. It's interesting Trump's mandated it, because what we're finding in the UK is actually local councils who, because of spending freezes, haven't been able to increase wages, have found that time is the new money. In fact, Cambridge County Council did an experiment where they said, we want to experiment with 4-day weeks as a way of attracting people who maybe we couldn't afford to get on a 5-day week. Yeah. And they're using it as an attraction, as a retention tool to bring people in. And I suspect we're going to see a lot more of that. Spain's doing something similar. They're trying to move government workers down to 4-day weeks because they believe they can reduce their unemployment rate by having more people split across the week. So these huge opportunities, breaking us out of some of the models of the past by doing these things. And I suspect, it's actually these governmental jobs or non-profit jobs that probably the first to migrate to it. So it's a shame when you see the likes of Trump trying to go back to the past. I think he's closing the door on a potential upside here.
Yeah. Around that sort of senior leadership table, Christine, as well, there's going to be some different voices there. I can't believe that everyone is wholeheartedly going, that sounds like a great idea. Let's just sort of revert to the return to office. Where are the sort of the chief people officers, the HR people on this? Where do they kind of say, who else is around that table going, well, yeah, we can get the spreadsheets out and look at the data and client satisfaction, but what's going on? What's the dynamic, do you think, around that table?
Because I was speaking to a WPP leader this morning who said, have you noticed that their CPO at WPP is actually previously a client service person rather than an HR or a people person? So a question being asked was, how many people have we actually listened to? And I think the sort of other side of that is, how have we rolled this out? Because, I think all the accounts have been that the PR, ironically, from a communications agency has left something to be desired. So I would say that, to Bruce's point, given the popularity of it, given the American data that tells us that 43% of people would rather get divorced than go back to the office 5 days a week, we have to assume not a lot of listening has happened, and that what we often see in other organisations is this sort of, there's a very senior leadership team who are a little bit sometimes remote from the day-to-day. And then you've got all these people who are trying to run agencies and compete in a tough market, deliver their numbers, who want the absolute best talent for their clients, who have now got another hurdle. Because even when I've spoken to people who said, we're going to try to avoid implementing this as far as we can, as soon as they try and hire someone says, that's all very well while you're in charge, but as soon as you take another job, I'm moving back 4 days a week. So you're still paying over the odds and you've still got that resistance. So it's a really tricky one, I think, from the people side.
Yeah. Last question for you. I think we could go for hours. This is immense. But what, it feels like, is there going to be a domino effect that happens, this kind of herding that you talk about? I would love to know what keeps you optimistic in this? Because you talk to so many people and you're seeing this, you're right under the bonnet. What sort of keeps you, what gives you hope? What gives you optimism that hybrid working and these mixed ways of workings are going to play out and the right way to do it, Bruce?
Well, I think the thing that gives me optimism is generally these mandates aren't working. But it's a really interesting phenomenon that's taking place in the workplace right now, which is for the first time, we are very comfortable with people openly breaking company policies. That used to happen before. I used to work somewhere and you had to be back from lunch on the dot of 2:00. And if anyone was back at 2:10 or 2:15, they would get reported to their boss. Well, we're a long way from that now, where a lot of people are quite proud of the fact they're not going along with the company policies. And what we find is that generally happens when people think the policy is wrong. We're witnessing a lot of it. You witness it with abidance with the law as well. When people think the law's wrong, they're willing to break the law. And what it does is it gradually sort of puts a break in the edifice of company culture. If people are very comfortable with not going along, one of the definitions I often use for company culture is the behavior in an organization where they're encouraged, rewarded, or tolerated. And what we're finding right now with return to work is that a lot of people are kind of not going along with it and the organization is tolerating it. Far better to say this is expressly the policy. We see the benefit in some face-to-face time, whether you set that number at 2 days a week or 3 days a week. We're going to coordinate because there's no point coming into the office to be surrounded with no one. If people are making their way into the office on Friday and there's no one there, then I don't know what the point is. If a tree falls in the office and no one else is in that day, I don't know. But trying to get some degree of coordination, the organisations that seem to be in the best place from my perspective are the ones that have coordinated days in the office that they've all got into the rhythm of. They're not quibbling about it anymore, and that's what we do around here. And so I am confident that we've got these preference paths. People have sort of carved pathways in the lawns that show where they want to go, and we have reached that new norm. It's just, I think some of it hasn't necessarily reached this slightly older C-suite, but I think for the majority of work, we've reached a new equilibrium and we're quite happy with it.
Yeah. What's keeping you optimistic, Christine?
I feel really optimistic. I think the depth of feeling towards hybrid means that you can't avoid it. Somebody's going to offer it. So there's always going to be an option, I think, to get it. And I think the other thing which makes me really excited is we know it's the wrong debate. We covered this at the beginning. Productivity isn't about location. It's about fewer interruptions. It's about being able to focus on some work, do some of that thinking you've talked about, and some of that brainstorming we've talked about. So actually, the things that make me excited is when people I talk to are like, right, how do we sort out the overwhelm of communications? How do we focus on the stuff? Get rid of some meetings, get rid of some of the Teams messages and do some real work. That makes me really excited because people feel better when they can get stuff done.
Very good. And a wonderful optimistic note to finish on. I wish we had longer. Thank you very much for joining us, Bruce, Christine. Thank you. Christine Armstrong and Bruce Daisley there. For such a long time, I've admired Christine and Bruce separately. They've spoken at IAB events. They've been on our podcast. I literally drink in everything that they put in my LinkedIn feed and email inbox. So to have them on together for this episode was really, really special. And they're just so across their brief, aren't they? Whether it's productivity or culture or the metrics we're using to try and prove if hybrid is working, they just know it. And both utterly compelling to listen to. The plan is to actually start season 17 of the podcast properly as planned at some point this year. We will endeavour to do that next week, and it's a high energy corker with Phil Rowley, who's head of futures at OMG UK. A huge thanks to Christine and Bruce, and thank you, of course, to you for listening. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.